Welcome to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Raj Kiran, Principal Technical Writer at OpenText. Welcome to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast, Raj. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Gauri. I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me in today.
Fantastic. So, Raj, I have looked at your LinkedIn profile and I have just introduced very little about you. So, please feel free to introduce a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and then you can also explain how you initially got into documentation, please.
Sure, I'll be happy to. So, my name is Raj Kiran. I'm from Bangalore in South India. I was born and brought up here. And one of the things which I've been doing right from the beginning of my career is, being roles where I've been involved around content, whether it's delivering content, creating content, or consuming content. So I kind of started off my career as a music journalist, writing short articles and blogs on various music zines back in the early 2000s. And from then on, I kind of moved into technical training. That's because I was kind of always interested in technology, in the programming side of things, the gaming side of things, and the hardware kind of side. Built a lot of gaming rigs back in the day, and that is something which kind of interested me a lot. So I think that was like something which interested me, and I thought technology will really help me in terms of making a great career in addition to what I had been doing. So I started working as a technical trainer, just to train people on all sorts of things like computer hardware, usage, maintenance, training for technical supports, or folks on customer service skills, telephone handling skills, and also computer software troubleshooting, stuff of that nature. And during this period, I also kind of used to always look at the kind of training material itself, which we used to hand out to people. It used to be in booklets, or sometimes it used to be very clumsily put together, or sometimes it used to be there used to be no real direction, there used to be no real flow to the content. So I started working with another team closely. So this was at Dell, where I started my career with the technology side of things. And I started working with a bunch of teams who were creating content mainly for customers at the time. And we said, hey, you know what, why don't we kind of put together some sort of cheat sheets or some sort of handbooks which our folks on the floor, or our technicians, or our field technicians can kind of use, like a ready reckoner. And while we were doing that, I kind of realized that this is a whole different world out there. For somebody who's not exposed to that side of things, initially it might feel that, hey, it's just a manual. But when you actually start authoring one, there are a lot of other considerations. There are a lot of other things which you start, kind of thinking about, and you start kind of sometimes worrying about what kind of content should be there, or is this content suitable for all the different people who are going to be reading this, and do I need to probably include images, or don't have to, all those kinds of things. So eventually, after a bunch of time in the technical training field, I kind of slowly got to hear from another colleague who was a trainer himself, a little bit about technical writing. At that point, I had absolutely no idea that something called technical writing even existed, even though I had read a bunch of technical documents and stuff, but I never really knew that there was an entire field completely dedicated, and a bunch of professionals who have been doing this very diligently, and something been going on for decades now. So this was back in about 2008, 2009. And that's when I kind of tried and connected on my own volition with a few technical writers within my previous company. And I tried to, kind of understand, hey, I do a lot of instructional design stuff, and I'm developing content, I'm writing material. And I see some of your documents on, the support portals for external customers. And I see a lot of overlap, some things which I write for my internal audiences is kind of repurposed for an external audience from your end. And I think, we do a lot of things similar, at least when it comes to working with content, even though the audience is different, the nuances of how we approach things are different, but essentially it is still writing. It is still about simplifying information and making sure people who consume that information can be successful at whatever task he or she is willing to perform. And that's how I kind of got a wind of what technical writing is. I researched a little bit more. I found out that It's fantastic. And there are a lot of people, there are a lot of literature around this. And eventually I got in touch with internally through people, internal job postings, that kind of thing. And officially moved in as a technical writer in the year 2010, perhaps in the beginning of the year 2010 at Dell. That's where my first taste of real technical writing was. I kind of was introduced to different kinds of things like style guides and repositories and version control and data XML and reusing content and how do you write for different kinds of audiences and different things of that nature. I started there initially documenting for hardware products. One of the first teams I worked with used to write the customer-facing documentation for Inspiron and XPS laptop computers or gaming computers, quick start guides and things of that sort. And eventually, I moved on to writing a little more complex stuff for on-field technicians of how to, do things like disassemble a laptop, or assemble a laptop, or configure a server or a storage system, configure a network, that kind of documentation. And so initially, the exposure was mainly towards the hardware side of things, and eventually, I kind of also got a taste of the hardware angle, where we had a lot of systems which would use certain software to connect to networks and things of that nature. And when I kind of got introduced to the software aspect of it, I realized that, again, within technical documentation itself, the way you treat hardware documentation and how you write for software or let's say networking or a cloud-based product is again completely different. There are a lot of other things which, you ought to consider. And I kind of learned different things about those different aspects. So immediately after Dell, I moved into with Cisco, which was a completely different shift for me. Although there was a fair amount of hardware documentations involved, stuff like routers and switches and things of that nature. But mainly, I was working with the WebEx team, as something like Zoom, what we're using right now for this call. And I used to write the backend documentation, administration guides, deployment guides, and stuff for that. And that really kind of taught me a lot about how vast the scope is for software documentation and how the different kinds of audiences who use software documentation and why it's absolutely necessary to make sure that your documentation is very well scoped, there's adequate amount of research and there's good amount of liaising with your development teams before you even write a single word. And that's more or less the direction I've been going with in terms of documentation, mainly been with software networking. So I'm currently right now with OpenText. We make some fantastic enterprise-wide storage and storage solutions and those kind of products. And also, we've been kind of very open to experimenting based on customer feedback about different ways we can deploy a documentation, different ways customers can consume it. And the main idea is that right now we believe that the kind of media you're using to deliver your documentation is immaterial. In today's world, everything is topsy-turvy. So traditional documentation goes straight out the window, and whatever works for you may not work for the others, and whatever might be working for another company just because somebody else is doing it does not mean it will work for us. And we've been working a lot with a lot of non-traditional kind of delivery systems as well. So that's more or less what my journey's been so far.
Fantastic, Raj. So it's an amazing story and journey to hear. And I think it's almost nearly 10 years now, isn't it? You officially started your technical writer skills. So super. So according to you, what's your documentation process at OpenText and who do you normally get involved?
Yeah, so our documentation process is, so we have different teams which are geographically spread over different continents. We have a bunch of teams, US, Canada, few in Europe, and we have a team here in Bangalore and a bunch of people in Hyderabad. And each of the sites have complete ownership of certain products end to end. So for example, my team has about 8 to 10 people. We report to a documentation manager here. And each of us takes up end-to-end ownership of one complete product or more than one product, depending on the complexity of the product or the scope of documentation required for that particular product. And we work with different teams to make sure that all the documentation is delivered at the time the product is made available to the customer. So our teams primarily, apart from our documentation team, we are constantly working with our engineering teams. So our engineering team comprises of program managers who have more insight about what the market is looking at, what kind of products they want to introduce, what's the monetary benefit for the company with this product, how is this product differentiating from a bunch of other products by other competitors out there in the market. So we gather those kind of insights right in the beginning, where we have these planning sessions and kind of mentally prepare, even though nothing writing, there's no planning even going on at that stage when it comes to documentation, but there is an idea being formed in your head that yes, so this is what the product is shaping up to look like in the next couple of months. So maybe we want to see and scope how much effort do you think we'll need. Do I probably need an illustrator for this product, or maybe do you think this is a product which could really help with having a more number of videos. So that kind of scoping happens at that stage. And after that, the teams themselves, they follow an agile kind of process. Of course, agile implementation is different in different companies, but it's similar to the traditional agile approach. We have 2-week sprints where a small product or a feature is developed towards that time. So we liaise very closely with our engineering and development and testing folks to check what they're working with, to first of all analyze if that particular feature is something which has a doc impact. If it has a doc impact, where does it fit in? Because we have a bunch of different kinds of guides for each product. We might have a user guide, we might have an administrator's guide, we might have any other kind of guide. So we'll then scope where it is required. There might be a bunch of features developed sometimes during a sprint, which might not have any documentation impact at all, right? Yeah. So that's the kind of scoping we do at that point. And what we kind of try and do is start building the documentation as and when the engineering teams are working on their features. So let's say they complete a small bit of feature. We don't really want to wait towards the end thinking like, hey, what, it's okay. It's just a small feature, so it won't take me that long to document. Let me wait till the end, let me get all of it together and put it together and send it out for review. So we kind of learned it the hard way, and I'm sure you'll agree that a lot of times that is one of the biggest challenges technical writers face. Yeah. Is that, towards the last minute, the engineers are busy, there are a lot of things going on at their end, and we are breathing down their necks to get our documentation inputs, and things can get a little bit sketchy. Yeah. So to avoid that, we have put together a very good process where we have like a ticketing system where, for each sprint, let's say I have a sprint for the next 2 weeks, I kind of pick up a few doc tasks. Let's say I'm working on product A, B, and C. I'll say, hey, okay, for product A, I will do this. I will document these 2 features. For product B, I will contact this engineer, find out this, or something which I've already completed. I'll send this out for review and incorporate the inputs. So you plan your doc tasks, and we plan it in terms of like a story point, just like a typical agile system. So approximately about 25 story points in 2 weeks is about 6 hours of work each day, 6 to 7 hours. Mm-hmm. And we kind of make sure that during this time we start working on each one of those, and it also gives a lot of transparency, Gauri. So while I'm working on a doc task, my manager knows what I'm doing, and also my product manager for that particular product which I'm documenting is also aware that, hey, Raj has picked up this for our product and he's working on this particular feature. So that becomes really useful because they can, always sometimes come back and say in the middle saying, hey, we are scrapping that feature, or that's been moved to the next release. Yeah. Or right now, hold on to it because we still don't know where this is leading to.
Fitting, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, so that kind of synchronization happens wonderfully when we follow this kind of an approach, working with different teams. And of course, once the sprints are complete, we keep sharing the documents, get the review inputs. Towards the end, we have like peer reviews, managerial reviews, editorial reviews, kind of a very standard synchronized sign-off process. Basically, we make sure that everything, the documentation part of things are all clear, tied off, signed off, and everyone is happy at least a month before the product actually goes for the launch. And we just take care of any minor things until that point. So that's typically in a nutshell what our process is for.
Fantastic. That's a very well planned process, Raj. Just to add to that, so that's a quite long hours of work you put in the 2 weeks of sprint, right? So during such times, what do you do as important factors while creating documentation? What are your important factors?
I think the most of the time, Gauri, at least I'm sure this is probably true for most technical writers as well, is that maybe I'll probably just need a day to actually write down my stuff into those guides which we were talking about. But gathering that information, finding out what is relevant, is the technical information accurate, Do I need to contact somebody else who has more information about it? Maybe download a copy of that program and run a few tests and see if it's working as it's intended. Also, maybe review certain of the UI and give the team feedback saying that, hey, it's over here you say this is how it works, but when I test it, that's not how things are happening. So you say a pop-up appears here, but nothing appears unless you do something else. So all that kind of research and groundwork is mostly what I spend my time with. I spend a lot of time on calls with my engineering folks. I spend a lot of time communicating via email and calls with my program manager to see about any changes and constantly talk about what we want to document and if it is relevant, if it makes sense, and if it definitely adds value to the documentation. So that's most of where our time is spent.
Fantastic. So a proper, good groundwork always gives you the benefit of spending less time in the later stages of your documentation.
Absolutely.
Super, Raj. So what impact will AR or VR have on documentation? And I think I would like you to first explain what is AR/VR, because it's something new I have not heard. Please explain to our audience, what does that mean?
Sure, Gauri. So augmented and virtual reality has been around for quite some time, and it's mainly an offshoot of fundamentally artificial intelligence technologies. So you have computer vision and a lot of other different terms which are involved here. So just to give you a simple explanation of what AR is, let me first talk about that. AR is nothing but you're using your surroundings around you and placing virtual information between your eye and the external world. So to give you a simple example, your car reverse cameras, right? You look at the car's reverse camera and it shows you those yellow lines at the back. And, if you're going off-road or going to hit something at the back, it flashes red or beeps or, does something. Mm-hmm. So that is an indirect example of augmented reality, because in reality, if you go back and look outside, those yellow and red lines don't exist in the real world.
True.
But what is happening is, there is a digital projection or some digital overlay of information that is being placed between you and the real world, which is helping you achieve something, helping you do something. It could be giving you information, it could be helping you navigate, or it could be something purely for entertainment purposes. So that's augmented reality. And right now it's become very popular, very powerful, because computing devices have evolved so much over the years. One of the closest examples, most recently, I think Pokemon Go. That game was a rage 2 to 3 years ago. People were crazy about it. And that's a fantastic example of augmented reality, where you just turn on your phone, turn on your camera. Your camera will act as an augmented reality sensor. Whenever it looks around, it places some virtual objects like these Pokemon, creatures between you and the real world, where you can collect them, play with them, stuff like that. So that's one example. And most recently, I think Google had something called Google Animals, where you can go search for a panda or a lion on the internet, and on your phone you can click on watch this in 3D or watch this in your room, and you could project a real life 3D model of that animal right in your living room while you can still see your surroundings. So basically, that's digital information being placed in the real world. So that's augmented reality. Virtual reality is again the same thing. You're again displaying a lot of virtual or digital information, but then you're wearing something called a head-mounted device or a headset, where you're not able to see anything around you, and all you're seeing is being projected into that headset. So you can be looking at instructions on how to perform surgery, instructions on maybe how to work with safety materials or hazardous materials. You could be looking at playing a sword fighting game or driving a car. So a bunch of different things are possible with AR and VR. And due to the advent of machine learning and artificial intelligence, these have become a lot more smarter. Simpler devices like your mobile phones have now become extremely powerful to deliver these experiences, which wasn't possible earlier. These technologies have been there around even from the 80s and 90s. Companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, IKEA, a lot of people have been experimenting with these, but they're mainly constricted to the military or the academia or research domain, because mostly they were very expensive. Computing power was hard to come by. But right now, even your normal phone has 6 GB of RAM, and that's fantastic. It has other stuff like, accelerometers, sensors, and cameras, and other things. So leveraging this technology for a larger audience has become a lot more easy, and there's a lot of traction, a lot of work happening in that area from big players like Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, who want to, democratize AR and VR.
Mm-hmm. So what impact do you think AR or VR have on documentation, Raj?
So for documentation, so my answer would be this, George. So basically, when you look at AR and VR for documentation, I think it's going to be huge for documentation dealing with hardware products. I mean, I come from companies which were mainly hardware product companies like Dell and, for example, Cisco. So for those kind of companies, it could be a huge blessing because you have your product, you don't have, and somebody will eventually be using that product. And right now, how is that information delivered? Maybe let's say, for example, you buy a new laptop computer, or I'll make it even more simple. Let's say you buy a big 70-inch television, and it's a smart television. It has a bunch of different ports and a bunch of different connectors and things of that nature. So your ideal way of knowing about that television currently would be probably a quick start guide which comes inside the box, or you might go to the company's website or look up a how-to video on YouTube, unboxing video, how to connect. But you can also simply deliver it via augmented reality. Or a person just downloads an app on their phone and just scans it with the mobile phone to your television. And any point of interest will light up on the television. For example, a small place will light up saying, hey, this is where you connect the power cord, or this is where you connect the USB connectors, or this is where are your remote control or your other options. Or you might also have a technical specification overlay. For example, I focus on the USB port. It might show me specific information about that, or one level deeper, saying this is USB 3.2, this is the transfer speed, a bunch of other things. It could also help me with troubleshooting. If I point to a particular option and say that, hey, I want to know how do I change, let's say the plasma screen, I have a replacement, I don't know how to do it. So it could also give me step-by-step instructions on how do I remove this, how do I unscrew something, where I need to connect the cables, what safety considerations I must keep in mind, that kind of thing. If you probably pick up any of the download an IKEA app, of course, they make some fantastic furniture, and previously they have big booklets, right, where they show you step-by-step how to assemble the boxes of furniture. Now it's just with an augmented reality app. You just scan the boxes, different pieces will represent and digital overlay information. So it will probably say something like, hey, this dovetail joint A, make sure it's mating with this part B. So now you have one edge of the table complete. Now let's work with the other end. So you don't really have to look at a physical paper manual at all, and just visually all that information is being transmitted. So for hardware documentation, the possibilities are endless, and I even see it as, kind of doing away with a lot of traditional documentation if it is implemented well and adopted well. But in terms of software documentation, again, there are different possibilities. There is no real direct scope where it can be as successful as hardware documentation. But in software documentation, what I'm at least envisioning is that it will not replace anything what we currently have, but it will supplement that in certain scenarios. For example, augmented reality can be used. For example, if let's say you bought a new software from my company, and you're a system admin and you have to deploy that for 3,000 people, and the deployment process is a complex one. My PDF guide, which is there on my support site, is maybe 650 pages, which has a bunch of different things, prerequisites, installations, different kinds of connections and different things which you need to do before you get the software up and running and configure it. What can be done with augmented reality is that each of your screens, or at least the important screens where some configuration information or something is being done, can be synced with augmented reality. So, for example, a system admin is stuck at, let's say, a certain screen, and he or she does not know what information goes in there. What do I need to enter here, or what dropdown do I need to select? One option is they can go to my documentation, which already has that information. That could take some time. They might have to find out where it is within the documentation, identify where that is. Or I could just give them an app through which they just scan the screen or the screenshot or the software itself with the camera, and it identifies the screen elements, and it understands that, okay, hey, what, this person is looking at the menu setting screen, and it will immediately open up, let's say, the PDF part, or the information or a video of where that task is being performed from our existing documentation, and bring it up to the user. So the user will save a lot of time and they're only getting what they're looking for rather than wading through a chunk of other documentation. That is one. It can also be used for training purposes, like creating 3D mascots and introducing products to people. You have a new product, you want to introduce it to a bunch of new customers. So you can use augmented reality workflows to show what is possible with the product in a more exciting way. So those are some of the possibilities, Kavi.
Super. So, what does the term guided UI means, Raj, and how this can be applied to technical documentation?
So, guided UI is just like having coach marks on your mobile phone applications. You download a new app, you have sometimes one or two buttons or one or two small boxes appearing in different parts of the menu, saying, "Okay, hey, click here to go to the menu."
Yep.
Click on this drop down and then you click on, okay, I got it. And you proceed to use the app, right? So guided UI is something similar, but for your applications. It could be a on-premise application, it could be a cloud-based applications, where I have different kinds of highlights or markers, which can come up and teach you how to perform a certain task or how to accomplish a certain workflow. So for example, you log into the software for the very first time, and let's say this is let's say an accounting software where you need to generate an invoice. So maybe the first step will be you have a wizard which will plonk up and say, hey, looks like it's the first time here. Do you want to see how to create a new invoice? And if you click on OK, it will guide you through the different steps. So you'll have a different colored marker which will go to a certain section of the screen and say, okay, first click on create. You click on create, it will then give you options. Pick a type of invoice you want to create. Maybe it'll give you one or two other kinds of information. Okay, this kind of invoice is used for this kind of billing. This invoice is used for so and so other thing. And it will walk you through different steps until you click on finish and create an invoice. So that same information can also be there in your documentation, but you're using some of that information to walk through your customer to actually perform tasks. And it kind of simplifies the process of not having to ever visit the documentation at all.
Super. Fantastic. I didn't know up until I spoke to you about the guided UI, though I've used many times.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great field, and there are a lot of different kinds of players in the market, like a company called WhatFix from India does a lot of services, makes it very easy to do that. And there are other popular players as well. And there are a lot of open source tools as well for companies who are strapped for cash. If you have a good development team, you could use these to create wonderful guided UIs for your products.
Fantastic. Great. So I'm sure you might have used some metrics to do this, but what kind of reduction in workload have you seen since introducing quality documentation?
So one of the biggest things, at least in the current organization perspective, is we've been very big on minimalism guidelines. So, we've just been wanting to cut down on anything that's unnecessary, anything that does not add value, anything that does not make sense. Just because we've been having a guide from the last 15 years doesn't mean we still need it. Nobody's using it. There's no value to the customer. Either we remove the content here and there, or we'll just get rid of it. And that minimalism approach has really improved the quality of our documentation in terms of reducing the page count, reducing the number of documents that need to be maintained. But it also, the biggest work it has reduced, at least for me personally and our teams personally, is that since we're doing minimalism, we aren't too thrilled to include screenshots anymore. So previously, if you had looked at any of our documentation, just to perform a task, you would have, for 5 steps, you would have 5 different screenshots. Then you're like, okay, if I click on file, click on setting, click on this, click on OK, and a screenshot for each one of them. But those are again user elements, and we want to believe that a user is smart enough to look at what's there on the screen. You don't really have to walk somebody through each and every step, unless of course there is something which might be a little more complicated, and that's case by case basis, so we believe. And so we're cut down on that completely. So our documentation is very crisp right now. If what could be 2 pages with 10 screenshots is just a half a paragraph now. And we've also been, kind of experimenting with things like article-based writing and a more conversational approach, rather than having a very rigid structure where you say step number 1, step number 2, step number 3, sub-step, etc. So we're trying to do away with that, experimenting with different products, seeing what works best with us. And that has definitely reduced. We have been working a lot with our information architects to kind of improve our authoring environments, One example to which we have improved our quality a lot is to use different types of variables in our XML. So if similar content needs to be spread across 7 different guides, we can just tweak the code in our XML a little bit and just you give a reference or connection reference to the content rather than moving that content physically from one place to another. So that saves us considerable time, eventually saves a lot of localization costs as well. So that's some of the thing which has really been working out for us in terms of improving the quality.
Super. So is OpenText currently generating any organic search traffic from your knowledge base?
So our search engine, so mainly our documentation is access based. So if you buy one of our products, you'll be given a username and password.
Okay.
And then you get to access. So there's not much of a documentation per se, which is customer facing. But within our internal help system, we have implemented a lot of different help protocols and different best practices using metadata and different keywords and tagging and that kind of measures to make sure that somebody who's searching for something finds the relevant article at least in the first 1 or 2 pages.
Fantastic. Yeah. Of course, if it's internal documentation, there's no possibility. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Super, Raj. I think that's quite a lot we've covered in the last 30 minutes, but we've not finished yet. Let's go on to our rapid fire round now.
Sure.
So I'm going to take you back to your old good days. Who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
In my career, I would say it would be more from my first mentor at Dell. So he was this old gentleman, his name was Venkat. He used to be an editor. He's worked in the medical field. He used to teach English in a school in New York. So, a very interesting person, very well learned, and had a lot of insights from him about how to approach documentation. And most importantly, he taught me how to unlearn a lot of things, because since I came from a training and instructional design, content writing background, the way I used to approach writing content was very different. And he kind of helped me move away from that structure and look at how do you focus on writing customer-facing instructions? How do you feel, simplify things? Previously, I kind of believed that, technical documentation also means that you need to be a little snazzy with your English and your vocabulary has to be a little more top-notch. And then I realized it doesn't matter. Simply does not matter. The more simpler you can make it, the better your documentation, the more effective it is. So I think that was a great learning for me in the initial days.
Fantastic. So can you share a documentation-related resource you have consumed recently?
I am constantly on I'dRatherBeWriting.com. I think it's a great site where, this person who runs the blog posts a lot of updates and discusses his insights on the future of documentation and what's going on in that particular space. So that resources I find it really useful. There's a lot of discussion also happening on that front, mainly because I'm also kind of interested on how the space is changing with API documentation and how different authors are adapting to different kinds of tools to get that done. And I'dRatherBeWriting.com, I think, does a fantastic job of covering a lot of this information in one place.
Fantastic. So we did have Tom as one of our guests for the podcast Ninjas. So you should definitely hear to his episode. You might enjoy it. Yeah.
Great. Another probably a problem website is there was this, I don't know if it's still being updated, but it's a site called the contentwrangler.com. So this site, again, is not focused mainly on tech docs. It focuses on tech doc, content writing, and UI UX. So even that's a wonderful and very interesting site, because we kind of need to realize that as technical writers, we also have a lot of overlap with what the UI UX folks are doing, and any innovations there will trickle down eventually into our documentation. So this site also gives a lot of good insights about how the both could work as a cohesive unit.
Fantastic. That's great, Raj. So let's come to our final question, which is, what is the one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
I wouldn't say I'm really 20 years old when I started documentation, but maybe if you'd ask me to go back to when I started documentation, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I think the biggest takeaway for me is at that time, I had a perception that, you'll become really great at this job if you know all the tools, if you know your XML tags and your product very well. I mean, all those things are definitely important. But my biggest advice I would go back and give myself back in that time is to start building relationships with people. And that's something which I've realized in my career so far, is that nothing is more important than the relationships you build with the people, with your program managers, with your engineering crew, people whom you work with day in and day out, not necessarily just your team members, but everybody who comes in contact as part of your job. That relationship building becomes very important. It could be just a hi, it could be just a few casual words here and there. It could be attending their meetings or generally finding about more curious about what products or features they are working on. But that, I think, Gauri, goes a really long way. I mean, in my own experience, I've seen that initially I wouldn't be really too bothered. I would get one or two emails from people saying, hey, you know what, we are starting off the dev process. Maybe in the next 3 months, we'll get you roped in and we'll get started. So I would just sit back and not do anything for the next 3 months about that product. And, as in when it came in, I used to, kind of roll with the punches sort of mentality. But eventually I realized that once I started being involved in their regular meetings, finding out what features they've been developing, what are challenges they are facing, it kind of made the process of documentation not only very simple for me at the end, but it also kind of built to create relationships with the team. So initially, sometimes, I mean, this is common to all big organizations where we have a documentation team. There is some pushback, there's a bit of hostility sometimes between different teams. So this completely vanished when that relationship building went on. A very healthy sort of a collaborative atmosphere began to take shape. And now I can happily say that, I have a pretty good working relationship with most of my folks with my teams. So much so that if there is some sort of a product or some sort of a feature, even though I might not be aware, sometimes the engineer or the PM themselves will contact me and say, hey, Raj, you know what, we've been kind of contemplating doing this. So we thought we'll let you know, or what do you think might be the doc impact, or can we do something better to document this? So that relationship building is absolutely essential, I think, Gauri, and I think that will be my biggest takeaway.
Fantastic, Raj. I think that's a very, very valid point, not only for documentation, to excel in any areas, whatever you do, you need to have good people around you and appreciate what they do, and you will get your appreciations done. So marvelous. So thank you, Raj, for sharing your unique experience and journey. It's been an absolute pleasure connecting with you today. And any last few words before you say bye to our audience? Anything to add?
Thank you so much, Gauri, first of all, for inviting me to come and talk here, and also it feels really good to kind of know that there is somebody as enthusiastic as you and your team who want to kind of talk more about technical writing and about technical communication in general, and have like a podcasting space where we discuss ideas. And I think that's wonderful. And the more we collaborate, the more we share knowledge, we can use this platform and our knowledge and skills as technical writers to definitely contribute and make the world a better place. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you, Raj, for your valuable thoughts and ideas, and your experience sharing, especially with us. So again, have a good time and stay safe.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.